As you just heard, one thing that cities on both sides of the Atlantic have long strived for is finding innovative ways to remain successful and clean in an urban environment. This cues the next portion of this Future Forum, where our following set of discussions explore EU-US cooperation, not just in the COVID crisis, but in the climate crisis.
The green transition and combating climate change has long been a key topic in the transatlantic sphere, dominating both headlines and policies since before the turn of the century. The climate crisis continues to be a priority even amidst the pandemic, and both the European Union and the United States are key players in working towards a cleaner, greener future. Here to discuss more on how the green transition might be shaped, I welcome CNN's Fareed Zakaria, who joins us in dialogue with Ms. Annalena Baerbock, co-leader of Germany's Alliance 90 party, and also known as the Greens.
Thank you so much. This is a huge pleasure and opportunity for all of us, but for me personally. And so I will take the opportunity to dive right in. I think none of you are interested in hearing my views on this when we have Annalena Baerbock with us. Let me first extend a warm welcome from the Atlantic Council and more figuratively from the United States to Annalena Baerbock.
Hello, good afternoon from Berlin, or good morning to you over the Atlantic. So it's really a pleasure being with you. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
So let me first ask you, we are all speculating, the world is speculating on the fact that you may be the next Chancellor of Germany. How likely is that? Give us a sense of your odds.
Well, because the voting system is a bit different across the Atlantic, we have a multi-party system and most of the times coalition. And my party, the Greens, has been for a long time like on third or even fourth row in the polls. So for us, it's really historic that we even nominated a person being a candidate for the chancellery. Currently at the polls, we are on the top, but we still have 5 months to go to the election. So it's everything in and everything is possible. But at the end, the voters have, luckily in democracy, the final say.
Tell us why you think you are at the top. This is very unusual, and it's unusual for a Green party, even though the Greens in Germany have been strong for a while. What does it say about where Germany is, and what does it say particularly about the two mainstream parties, the SPD, which is now, essentially a shadow of its former self, but also the CDU?
Well, most importantly, I would say that it says a lot about the world, the situation of the world and Europe. We have seen like a green wave, not a political green wave, but a green wave over the last 5-6 years after the Paris Agreement on climate policy. And therefore, the question that the markets of the future, the economy of the future is carbon neutral has find its path all over the world, but especially within Europe. And for a couple of years, therefore, the question of climate neutrality is on the top agenda for many Europeans. We as a Green Party have stood for this environmental issues since we have been founded 40 years ago. And on the other hand, I believe that in societies, you always have this momentum of a historic change, like it was in the past after the Second World War, the building of our nation. And then again in the 90s, reunification of our country, again at this kind of crossroad where we have to take our future in our own hands, building a carbon neutral society together with a social just society. And this gives the momentum of change for our country. And the Greens stand for this change, for this hope, whereas other parties stand more for the status quo. And that's why we have a big movement within our society for the hope and for the change.
So what do you think will change if you became chancellor? The world has, as you say, got used to Chancellor Merkel, who has been very steady, but in a sense has been part of a very familiar world for us. If the Greens were to come into power, you were to become chancellor, particularly for Germany in its relation to the outside world, what would change?
Well, I'm not standing for changing everything, but bringing big parts of society in a better future, meaning building really a carbon neutral and social just society, and not just working from one momentum to the others, but have a long-term vision. On the other hand, my country is based in an integrated and united Europe, and our historical path is being connected with the rest of the world. And this is a tradition which is also strong connected to a Green Party. So building up a carbon neutral, social just society within an integrated Europe, working on the peace of the world is the foundation of my party and also my big vision for the next decade.
Part of the Green Party's history has been a fairly substantial criticism of the United States. I think particularly if I think back 30 years, has that changed, or do you believe that the part of the nature of the Green Party is to be much more critical of US dominance of the world or status in the world, and of the very tight alliance that the United States and Germany have historically enjoyed?
Well, I think it's a broader picture, like the Green Party, but it was back 40 years ago. Actually, it's a coincidence, but it's a funny one. We were founded in 1980. This was just the year when I was born. So you see like how long our tradition goes back, and also how much our party has changed as like people in our country have changed over the last 4 decades. But when we were founded, it was like the foundation of different movements. It was a strong women movement fighting for equal rights for women, but also for human rights. It was a strong environmental movement coming also from an anti-nuclear momentum, especially after then in the 80s, Chernobyl happened, which really was a strong point in our history. But it was also built on a peace movement because of our past, because of our history. And in this mixture of different movements, the party's DNA was also always founded in the question of freedom and peace and human rights. And this is, I think, which you are connecting on the question of also the relationship with the US, but also Russia on the other hand, because many people in Germany had a strong fear of being split between this Cold War, between 2 countries which are fighting against each other, and Germany is just in the middle, Europe is just in the middle. But we have like over the 40 years, because for us it was so important to be a party of peace, but also being a party of human rights, that for especially the agenda of the responsibility to protect, which was a big thing also for the United Nations. This is our foundation of saying democracy, liberal democracy, have to fight for human rights, sometimes also with military measures to prevent genocide. And on the other hand, every military action has to be founded on international public law, which is also set up in our constitution because of our past. And this is a bit the history, how we also followed NATO, the development of NATO. But we believe that a strong European Union and a strong transatlantic relation also based on NATO is our common ground, how we can build the future together.
Do you agree with Donald Trump that Germany should be paying 2% of its GDP into its defense to meet that NATO guideline? Do you think it is appropriate?
I think that it's very not only appropriate, but also needed that Europeans, and therefore Germans, have to take more responsibility for our own security. Back in the 90s, Bush Senior said to our German chancellor, why don't we start a partnership in leadership? But in the 90s, Germany was not ready. We were not reunited. Many other Europeans were a bit afraid of a strong Germany again after the Second World War. But I think now, almost 30 years later, it's really the time to step up a new step to set up this partnership in leadership between Europe and the US. This means also more responsibility in security issues. But I have my doubt that the 2% target of the NATO, which was set up before also Mr. Trump, is still the state of the art because it's related to the GDP, as you know. And this means that in a crisis like now, where everything is kind of unsecure, rationally, we have to invest less because 2% of a GDP, which decreased, is not the same capacities as when the economy is growing. So from my point of view, the question is, what kind of capacities do we need? What kind of capacity can Europe bring? But it's not a good figure to connect it to a GDP, which is so depending on the economic growth. And secondly, we have new threats and challenges like in cyber relation. So it's different to have tanks or be really responsible and really secure in the cyber world.
Would it be fair to say what you're describing is a kind of a Green Party and your leadership that would, I think, be reassuring to most Americans in the sense that it seems to affirm the Atlantic Alliance, affirm NATO, affirm the importance of thinking about human rights. And so I'm wondering, this moment happened before, when Joschka Fischer became foreign minister, and people who had worried that in that case, I think he was a little older than you, so had in the 1980s thrown a couple of Molotov cocktails in anti-American demonstrations, that he turned out to be actually a very pro-NATO, even pro-US foreign minister. Would you say that this is a model you look at favorably, that of Joschka Fischer in government?
Well, he's part of my party. And actually, when he was foreign minister, just at this moment, I joined the party. This was in 2004, actually like a really emotional moment for me, because it was the 1st of May in 2004 when Europe did its enlargement to the east. So European countries joined the EU, especially from the east, and I come from a region around Berlin. It's called Brandenburg. It was Eastern Germany, and it has a direct border over the Oder River to Poland. And my own grandfather fought like in the winter of 45 at this river, at this border. And I was there standing in 2004 on this bridge, which obviously was rebuilt between Poland and Germany, when Joschka Fischer, as foreign minister, together with his colleague from the Polish side, was celebrating again the reunification of Europe. And this was really the momentum when I thought, wow, we are standing off the shoulders, not only on Joschka Fischer, but also of our grandparents, who made it possible that countries who were enemies are again, not only in peace, but in friendship together. And this is what the grounds where I'm standing on, fighting for Europe, which lives in friendship in a common integrated market. And for this, we need institutions like the EU, like a strong transatlantic relation, because this wouldn't have been possible, our reunification, without the support from the US. So it's, building on our history. But this is really important for me. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to become a chancellor. History is nothing which just flows like a river. It's always a momentum where people have to take the courage to build the future actively. So it doesn't make sense to say, I just follow up what Joschka Fischer did 15 years ago. I take the best from the past to bring it in the future. And coming back to your question also with the NATO, for example, I think the most important thing is to put up a new strategic agenda. What is the role of the NATO in the year of 2021 and not in 2004? And we have unluckily faced Ukraine situation. We have seen that what we believed back in 2004, that there's never again war in Europe, is not true. And therefore we have to redefine our strategic goals within NATO, within the EU, and coming up with the new challenges ahead, also fulfill it with resources, for example, with military expenditures. But this is also important for 2021. The threats are not only cyber, it's the climate crisis, it's COVID, it's pandemics worldwide. So for me, it's so important that it's not building a new wall around Europe or Transatlantic region, but really seeing that we work together in a world of institution of strong human rights, but being aware that we have other countries like China, like Russia, who are also in a geostrategic fight with us.
So let's talk about Russia. Do you believe that the European Union is doing enough to support Ukraine, to support the countries on Ukraine's border like Poland? Or should there be more efforts made to really make both Russia pay some kind of a price for what it's done and to deter further actions? The Russians only 2 weeks ago massed 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border.
I believe that the problems of the last year from the European Union was that we didn't do an active foreign policy. There wasn't an active role of the EU, and this is due to the lack of an active German foreign policy, because Germany is the biggest player in the EU, and it's crucial that if the EU wants to be strong, if the EU wants to play its international role and also its role in its own neighborhood, then it needs a strong, open but active German foreign policy. It's not about Germany telling the others what to do, but if we are behaving very passively, it's hard for the others. And it also needs a strong interaction between Germany and France. And most importantly, also with our European neighbors. And this didn't happen, to say it very frankly, in the last years. The Baltic state, Poland, even though I have also disagreement with some politics of the governments, especially in Poland. But anyhow, we are a friendship group together, and they said, we are afraid, actually. We are afraid because of the situation in the Ukraine. And Germany wasn't standing really like strong on their sides. And give you a practical example for that. After the invasion of the Crimea and Eastern Ukraine, the European Union set up a new energy policy saying we cannot be so dependent anymore on Russia, because if we cannot heat in winter when Russia quits our connection of gas, it's really hard to say we have a strong tone on sanctions, because I know we depend on them. So therefore, the European Union said we have to be more independent, especially with our imports of energy. And we set up a new regulation on this. And they set up sanctions. But then from the Kremlin, they pushed for this pipeline Nord Stream 2, which is very known to you as well. And unluckily, the German government, from the Ministry for Industry, but also from the Chancellery, said, well, this is a pipeline which is just on economic interest. It has no political dimension. And this was totally wrong. And with this pipeline, with this indirect or even direct support from the German government, all the sanctions we put in place because of Crimea were kind of contradicted. And this is not a stringent foreign policy. And this is something I have criticized all over the last years. And this is also something I think has to change in the future. It has to be a common European policy where everybody is standing together.
So what would you do with Nord Stream?
For me, we cannot finalize this project. The problem is that there's already a pipeline underneath the Baltic Sea. There's already the connection pipeline throughout my region where I live, down to the Czech Republic. But this pipeline contradicts our sanctions, so it cannot go in place, it cannot start its action, especially because it's pretty clear that after a couple of years, if we have gas via this pipeline, there will be a cut of the pipeline going through Ukraine. And this is a new security threat for Ukrainians. And therefore, this pipeline there cannot go any gas through this pipeline because we have big security problems otherwise on Ukraine. I think it's really important to be also like in the front row of action, not being so passive on this project. That actually we modernize the pipeline via Ukraine. This was also a request from the Ukrainians for many, many years. We need hydrogen in Europe to be carbon neutral in the future. There's a high potential in Ukraine for renewable energy, for wind and solar, that we have already this pipeline there to transfer now fossil gas. We can set it up for green hydrogen pipeline in the future. And I think, so it's not just being against this pipeline Nord Stream 2, it's on the other hand, really enabling Ukrainian transporting green gas in the future to the European Union.
Chancellor Merkel says that with regard to China, the European Union, Europe, Germany have a different view than the United States. I think suggesting that it would be less combative, less tough. Germany has huge exports to China. How will you balance Germany's economic relationship with China with the need to deter China from external expansion, or to speak out when China does things internally, whether in Hong Kong or in Xinjiang? Do you think you will be able to be tougher than Chancellor Merkel on China?
Well, for me, it's not human rights on one side and economic interest on this side. If you set up the world in black and white, this is not reality. There are so many colors in between, and there are also so many challenges in between. This makes it so difficult talking about international relation, because you cannot, as a democracy, as a union of human rights and values, you cannot say either values or economic interests. So you have to bring them in balance, and this means sometimes you have to fight very strong on human rights. For example, if we look at the situation of forced labor in German it's Uiguren, I don't know if it's the English word. So we can say as Europeans on our common European market, we don't have products being produced out of forced labor. So there we defend our human rights, our values very strong. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean saying there is no import, export anymore between Europe and China. This is out of the world. We are obviously also depending on the relationship with them. But we can say we don't take certain products out of these regions. So this is always like balancing human rights, balancing our values with economic interest. And I would say we are not like really apart on this point, like we as Europeans, but also maybe we as Greens with the current US administration, because you have also now intensified the dialogue on the question of climate, and on the other hand have a strong tone on human rights and also the question of tariffs. So I think they are similar on a similar field than your current new administration.
Germany is facing a worse situation with COVID than I think anyone would have guessed, certainly from the first few weeks and months of the crisis. Is part of the problem here that the European Union decided to take on the issue of vaccines, basically taking on a public health function that has traditionally been handled by the member states. Germany has a fantastic public health system, but the vaccines were all handled by the European Union. Was this a case of the European Union overstepping its boundaries and doing something it should not have done?
No, they have really hard no, because if you are an internal market, if you are a union, then it's not possible of saying, well, we do our own business here in Germany, and the Baltic states or smaller states, they can do what they want, because this would have meant, because they didn't have their own vaccination productation in their countries, that we say, we don't care what happens, for example, in Poland. And we are what I was describing. We don't have borders anymore within, luckily, the European Union. Like people I know, they have family in Poland, they come to Germany and work here. So it was very important that the European Union took all together, all our 27 countries together, a strategy on the vaccination. There have been mistakes about the question, okay, how much do we buy? But buying it together was very, very important for us, and I think also as a model for the world. And now we have to take the next step, that it's not just the EU, it's not just the US, but we have also a common and shared responsibility for the whole world, that everybody can get vaccinated in the upcoming months.
When you look at the Biden administration and the US in general, what do you think are the challenges you face, the disagreements you'll have? What do you think are the opportunities? You know, I guess what I'm asking is, you know, if you have a message for Americans about what a Germany under you would look like, what is your message?
We have a bright future together if we work together on a transatlantic Green Deal. I think there's a chance ahead of us for both sides of the Atlantic, because with the new Biden administration, you invest now, from all what I've read and heard and seen, investing really in a future of a carbon neutrality together with a strong movement on social justice. And this is actually the same idea we are having on the other side of the Atlantic as the European Union with the Green Deal. And I think there's an incredible possibility of showing we can work together on the future project, which is the most important future project for our kids and grandchildren. And on the same tone and level, we can bring something to the world which makes the world a better place, and also will strengthen our democracies. Because it's really crucial that democracies show within the upcoming months that we can not only fight a pandemic with democratic measures, but also the biggest threat, like the climate crisis, as democracies. And so it will strengthen the climate, it will strengthen the welfare, but also, if we do it right, international institution and the rule of law worldwide.
Let me ask you finally, there is one visible legacy of America's historic relationship with Germany, which is American troops in Germany. Donald Trump wanted to reduce them, now they seem to be back. Are you comfortable with American troops being stationed in Germany? Do you think 20 years from now, it would still be appropriate?
Well, we are together in an alliance. And if we spend a certain amount of our money for military interest, I think the biggest responsibility also with regard of taxpayers and society is to be most efficient with this money going into the military budget, because if it goes in the military budget, it doesn't go in the housing, in the healthcare, in the school budget. So efficiency is really crucial for me, and working together very closely between all the European members within NATO and the Americans means the highest efficiency, and therefore it's very good that we also work close together with soldiers, with military equipment in Germany, in other European countries, but also, yeah, over the Atlantic. So yes, in a very efficient way where we don't duplicate our structures and where Europeans take up more responsibility in the upcoming months for themselves.
But that's a yes.
Yes.
Annalena Baerbock, a pleasure to have you. I think this would be a very, very interesting conversation for most Americans. We're very grateful to you for having joined us. I think it's now time for me to turn it back to the studio.